It's a long, miserable prep because and this is where I talk about this a lot, because people don't believe that HRT should count.
Warning! This is for entertainment purposes only. This is not medical advice. Although I'm a doctor, I'm not your doctor yet. If you want me to be your doctor, click the link in the description box. But otherwise, this is just for fun, kids. Don't do this at all. You're watching Dr. Todd Lee TV, where theoretically you could learn a bunch of cool shit. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Street Chemistry, Remedial Street Chemistry, with your host, Dr. Todd Lee, and my lovely sidekick, Coach DJ. Or I don't know, maybe I'm the sidekick. What do you think?
I have to be the sidekick because I'm a blue Smurf today.
You're not. I was gonna say you're my Robin, but really you're my Blue Jay.
We're gonna figure it out for us next time.
So, let's see. This is episode 4. Some people are gonna be confused because they'll wonder what happened to episode 3, and we'll just say that episode 3 is being archived for now because the world is not ready for the truths that were revealed in episode 3.
We got a little excited.
Yeah, we got a little worked up. It's definitely not for YouTube. It might be on Rumble in the near future, but it is not for YouTube. So if you guys ever want the uncensored, unedited stuff, then you have to go over to Rumble. So, that being said, what are our questions today, DJ?
So we got some fun ones. I'll start in order because I just posted this last night. The first one, I think this is actually what we had touched on last time, or kind of falls in line, and these kind of go together. It says, how do I know if I have reached my maximum potential and should start using PEDs? And then the other question that I felt like fell in line with this was, I'm in off season for my first show. When is the right time to become enhanced?
Yeah.
So I thought this was very open-ended because the way that the first one was phrased especially, I think that it almost seems like they felt like they were being pushed. Not everybody needs to get on PEDs, whether you're a fitness enthusiast or there are people that compete naturally as well. It might not be as exciting as like NPC and IFBB, but people do it. I don't know why people feel that they need to get on PEDs, and that's how a lot of the questions that I get like this are, that there's some type of requirement that at a certain point you have to start using pharmaceutical enhancements. And then in terms of the show, I felt that was like very open-ended because do you want to be enhanced? Are you competing in NPC or in ANBF? And that's really going to be between you and your coach. And are you going to be competitive without enhancements, or will enhancements actually make that much of a difference in off-season length of time? So they were very open-ended questions.
Yeah. Do you have answers? Like, do you have an idea where you want to get started answering these questions? Because I think they're so vague, I don't even know where to start.
I think that it would be safe for this purpose to assume that these people are wanting to use enhancements and are planning on using them. And so the determining factor, what we would be assessing is when would be the right time to start incorporating it. And I get asked that a lot. When do I know I've reached my max potential? I get asked that a lot. Like, how do I know if I've maxed out completely naturally?
So how do you think someone knows whether they've maxed out completely naturally?
I honestly don't think people do know. I think that if you are eating and training correctly, you're going to continue on that trajectory and you will make progress. It might not be huge, notable progress like in the beginning, but you will continue to improve. Obviously, when we are speaking in terms of being natural, there will be a certain rate of like diminishing returns where we start to see a little bit of regression due to age. But realistically, you keep improving, and it really comes down to just making the decision on when you want to use enhancements, because you're not going to max out. And if you wait to max out, you will be, again, it's going to be hitting that rate of diminishing returns.
Yeah, I don't really see there being a limit to how much muscle a person can gain based off of how much muscle they have. I think it's more how much can your frame carry without it looking bad. And the steroids help you recover from workouts faster, theoretically help you grow muscle faster, but it's not a lot faster. Instead of it being a half a pound a month of muscle, you can gain maybe, or instead of a quarter pound a month, it's a half a pound a month of muscle. If you've already approaching that limit, or there is no limit, but if I've already been lifting for 10 or 15 years, then you're growing at such a slow rate that steroids will double that rate. So you're still growing very slowly. It's not, I mean, is it helpful? Yeah. I mean, if you're a competitive bodybuilder, you need every advantage possible. But if somebody has a natural testosterone over 700 total, they probably don't need to be using anabolics. Also, like, to me, it really is an issue of people don't really care if they've maxed out, that they want to just accelerate the process. And I always say, are you done having kids? And they're like, well, I thought you can still just cycle on and off and have kids. I'm like, it's very difficult and very expensive to pull that off correctly. And if the sophistication level is so high that reproductive endocrinologists don't understand it, so certainly a patient isn't going to understand how to do it, no matter how many forums they participate in. So it's best you just have all the kids you want to have go on anabolics and never come off, and just run it at a low dose that's beneath the threshold that your body starts taking organ damage. So if this is how much you can handle, and this is when you start taking organ damage, you chill here for pretty much forever. Now, as you get older, this comes down. So you go to, and as you get older, the threshold to grow more muscle goes up. So eventually the damage threshold and the growth threshold pass each other. And now you have to be in the zone where you're taking damage and you're not growing, versus up here, whereas you're taking damage and you're growing. And usually that's when age would catch up. But usually people only age if they're not using GH, not using testosterone, not eating right. They're just not living a perfect lifestyle. So in the end, like, what's the point? Is the point of the steroids so that they look more attractive, so they can get more girls going to the club? So if clubbing is the end result, then the lifestyle is not healthy. And so you're going to be taking damage and you're going to be aging. Whereas if the whole point is to be a monk and live an empty life where you do nothing but eat, sleep, and train, then yes, you can prolong your life so you can be in your self-imposed prison for longer. So there's like this bizarre outcome. And I guess they don't want to think that deeply about it and see the thought process all the way through and see the final output of what the effort is. They just want to grow muscle faster.
I think that's what it boils down to.
If you're just done having kids, then you can go on. That's the simplest threshold, is get all the kids you ever want to have and then cop on and just don't go off. So it doesn't matter whether you've hit your limit. It doesn't matter whether you're off season, on season. Nothing else really matters, because the steroids are always going to make everything better, assuming you're not taking so much that you're getting poisoned by them. So the use is good, abuse is bad. Now, a question as to what's the difference between use and abuse, that's a much more concrete question, and I have much more concrete answers. But when do you know when it's time to start based off of your current level of physique? That's not really the question. The question is...
That's what I think. I don't think basing it off of max potential really even... I think the question that they should be asking, knowing that they want to take enhancements, or you're not asking that question. You want to take enhancements. So the question would be, at what point in my training and my diet do I have a proper foundation? Because if you've been in the gym 3 months, and a lot of people are in the gym, they get there for 1 month, they lose 2 pounds, like, all right, I'm ready to get on gear. This is now my life because I've done it for 3 weeks, 21 days. I'm going to try and be a pro now. That's just how people think. But I think that should be the framework of the answer, is, have I built a base, and do I have all of my diet and my training in check? And normally the answer is no, even for people that have been training for years, for an extensive period of time. a lot of those baseline factors that you and I would assess are not there. Now, do you have any natural competitors? Or have you dealt with any completely natural competitors?
No, I mean, almost everyone is a lifestyle client who wants to use gear, male or female. That there's a few competitors. Obviously, the competitors are enhanced, but it's like asking someone whether they're going to go to a gun. Like, nobody wants to be natural. And the people who say that they want to be natural, they're lying. That the few people I've ever talked to that actually say that they believe in natural were just scared to use steroids because they were scared, or they're scared of needles. And then once they made the switch, once they manned up, I guess is probably the wrong way of saying it. Once they swallowed their fear and faced their fears or whatever and started using, that they don't know why they ever were opposed to it. They admitted that it wasn't really a moral thing. It was just afraid of the consequences, that they knew they didn't know enough to do it safely, and they didn't really trust anyone else knew how to do it safely either.
It's a long, miserable prep, because even, and this is where I talk about this a lot, why, because people don't believe that HRT should count as an enhancement. And if you're looking at how it applies to like your day-to-day, no, it shouldn't. But when you look at it in a competition scenario, when you have these negative, down regulations due to the extreme dieting and consistent training, and you aren't recovering well, if you are on HRT, even if you're not in super physiological levels, you're not optimized, you have the opportunity to feel better. You don't experience those same down regulations as someone that's natural. So I've done natural preps with people, and they have no tools for recovery to aid in their sleep. Like even just females, when their progesterone starts plummeting, like it's not pleasant. It's very rigorous. And I do feel, for the second question, if you can get through one prep naturally, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you should be natural based on your composition, how you look, and what federation you're competing in. But if you can do a prep naturally, I'd say that you would be able to deploy anabolics at that point in time. That takes a lot of dedication and discipline to just feel like ass for 12 to 24 weeks.
I guess I don't. I see what you're saying. I guess I wouldn't hold someone to that. Like, if someone wanted to do it natural, fine, we'll do it natural. If they want to do it enhanced, we'll do it enhanced. Like, to me, that there's no reason to tell someone that they should do one prep naturally. Now, as far as peaking goes, I would say let's not use diuretics our first peak and see how good we can peak you without the diuretics, because in my experience, every time you use diuretics, you just come up flat. It never makes you look better.
And this person, I don't know if they had asked the question, when do I bring in anabolics if I'm getting ready for a show? I would assume at that point, you already know whether you're competing enhanced or not. So I thought that, and typically if you are working with a coach, that's going to be something that you unpack a lot earlier. You're not going to make that decision when you're starting to approach prep. And if you are enhanced, typically you will go through a building phase with those compounds before being totally natural and then suddenly being thrown. And we talked about this last time, suddenly being thrown on different compounds, not knowing how your body's going to respond, as a giant experiment in prep. So I think in that scenario, if you're competing enhanced, you have to have that baseline down, even if it's just test.
Yeah, I guess we got to unpack that and say, what is the hypothetical beginner prep cycle? We've done pro level cycles before, but we've never done beginner cycles for prep. So I think women are the easiest ones to do. Is I would test their testosterone and see if the testosterone is normal. If the testosterone's not normal, I would use 0.5 milligrams per day testosterone approximately to get them in that 50 to 80 range for natural testosterone, to 80 to 100 range for enhanced testosterone. Very low dose. So it might be 0.3 to 0.6 milligrams per day. So for people with a bad math, that's 2 to 4 milligrams of testosterone a week, not the 10 every other day that your shitty HRT clinic is having you do. But because they can't give you the right size needle, and they're not good enough chemists to make it dilute enough. But the correct way to do it is like a 5 milligram per milliliter bottle of test and a 1/10 of a milliliter, like 10 on an insulin syringe, every day, intramuscular, not subcutaneous, every day, like 0.5 milligrams approximately of testosterone. That is the correct way to do HRT for a lady. And then the last 6 weeks of prep using maybe 5 milligrams of Anavar pre-lift. That would be the proper first cycle. You could do it differently. You could do, I would say, maybe 2 milligrams sublingually for 12 weeks. But I think we talked about before that you said there are studies that show that long exposure to 2.5 is worse than short exposure to 5 for virilizing.
Duration is the big one.
Although none of those were done on sublingual preparations. Those were done on when you swallow the pill and it's in your system for a very long period of time, 8, 9, 10 hours half-life. Whereas if you do it sublingually, you get a huge spike in activity during the training and it's out of your system by the time you're done training. So the chances of virilization is pretty much nil. You basically open your muscles up, drive the Anavar into the muscles, and then the Anavar is out of your system because it's into your muscles and it's doing its thing, rather than it floating around in your body all day, binding to your clitoris or your vocal folds or other areas you don't want the testosterone or the Anavar going to. Greetings, Earthlings! Like, subscribe, and share this video. Share with a friend. Share with enemies. Share with people who think they know everything. Spread it like herpes. Speaking of herpes, I am a medical doctor, and I could be your doctor. Click the link in the description box. I can order you blood work. I can read the blood work. I can treat any illnesses. It's like an HRT clinic that's a one-man army. Also, I do coaching. Dr. Krina Dotson and I have a coaching business called Apex Coaching. So if you sign up with me, you get coaching, which is nutrition, programming, competition prep, or lifestyle coaching, as well as all the medical stuff. So you have 2 doctors in one business. It's going to be contest prep, the nutritionist, the programming person, and the doctor all in one. You can't beat it. It's integrated. It works the best that way. You'll love it. Make sure to do it. Click the link in the description box. That's for women.
And now for males.
For males, I would do 5 milligrams of Tren a day on the last 6 weeks. Probably Clen and potentially T3 for both genders. And I know what you're thinking, like, wait a minute, you skipped test and went right to Tren? And I was like, yeah, because if you're 5 milligrams of Tren will go a long way. And you're not going to have that much suppression from 5 milligrams. You're going to have natural testosterone still present at that point. Whereas if you put someone on testosterone for prep, that's kind of pointless because you're going to pull it at the end anyway because you want to minimize estrogen conversion. So I think it makes more sense if you're going to do the other way of doing it if they're afraid of needles is Winstrol, like 25 to 50 milligrams a day of Winstrol the last 6 weeks. If they're not afraid of needles, I would do 5 milligrams of Tren. And in theory, you could split the difference. You might even work it up to 5 milligrams of Tren the last 6 weeks and 25 milligrams of Winstrol. And if the Winstrol makes them feel like shit, you could use Anavar. It's just Anavar's more expensive than Winstrol.
What Winstrol's that they call it poor man's Anavar?
It is pretty cheap compared to Anavar. Anavar, manufacturing cost of Anavar is $17 per gram. The manufacturing cost of Primo is $40 per gram. The manufacturing cost of Tren is $7 per gram. And the manufacturing cost of testosterone is, I think, 10 cents per gram.
It's a hell of a difference.
Yeah.
Okay, so especially because we're on the topic of Tren, what are your staple supplements for health, and what are your staples for PEDs? Again, very open question because PEDs could be literally anything, but staples for health.
So I would say having all your micronutrient needs met through food first and a multivitamin second would be part one. Two would be omega-3s, maybe 2 grams of EPA and 1 gram of DHA for women, 3 grams of DHA and 1 or 2 grams of EPA for men. I think that's vitamin D3, 5,000 milligrams for women, 5,000 IU, and K2, 100 K2 for women, probably 5 to 10,000 IU for men for the D3 and the 100 K2, maybe 200 K2. For women, definitely a calcium supplement of some sort, because I'm not a dairy fan, so women need calcium from somewhere, and I think dairy, although it's a good source of calcium, it's also a good source for cancer. What's the proper term? Carcinogens. Yeah. So I'm not a fan of the dairy. Now, a lot of people are saying it's not organic dairy, and it's like I can't trust your average lifestyle client to differentiate and navigate which brands are really organic and which brands aren't. Just dairy's just no. I'm a big anti-dairy person. I know that Greek yogurt's supposed to be good for a bunch of stuff, but yeah, it's just easier just to eliminate an entire food group that's full of contaminants. What about you?
That's it for what I use, like what you just named off. I'll throw in a probiotic because I feel like I don't even use a multivitamin. Like maybe towards the end of a prep if somebody's really low on food, like a little bikini girl or something. But if you have your micronutrients mapped out, you get your nutrition from your food. I always do a hefty serving of omegas. I always do a K2 and D3 combo typically, unless we'll need to separate it for dosage purposes, a probiotic, and then as needed from that based on what maybe lab work reveals or if we're trying to mitigate something that they're experiencing. But I keep my supplements stupid simple. If it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, Karina's really good with the food, the micro, and the supplements. So that's where part of our division of labor comes in. Is I think I'm pretty good compared to the average guy, the average coach, the average pro bodybuilder, the average doctor. I think I'm above average in those categories, but she's top of the business. Like nobody knows that stuff like she does. In fact, I was going to try to have her on the podcast at some point to discuss micros, gut health, and supplements based off
gut health. I'd love to watch her on gut health.
Yeah. Gut health is, to her, it's super simple and boring. But I'm like, okay, what isn't boring? And she's like, that's a good point. I was like, so if there's 8 or 9 subjects that you can cover and one of them is underrepresented dramatically, and then I would rather the expert in everything cover the one subject no one else is an expert in. You know what I'm saying? Like if she's in, let's say hypothetically, let's say the world's best expert, like Kurt, might have an 8 out of 10 in every category, but a 10 out of 10 in pharmacology. And everyone wants to have him on for pharmacology, but that's boring to him. He'd rather talk about training, but it's like people acknowledge that he would be the 10 out of 10 about pharmacology. So that's what they're ready to listen to. It's not like most people can't conceptualize you can be good at more than one thing, especially when they're not good or world class at anything. They can't fathom that there's someone who's world class at more than one thing, right? So it's frustrating for the expert because then people pigeonhole him, kind of like actors always getting typecasted. Like Boris Karloff, after he played Frankenstein, was never able to play anything other than a monster.
And now for PEDs, standard supplements of PEDs, now this is when we talk about, like, if we're talking about anabolics, that's always interesting. People are very interested in that. This is the stuff that is probably not as intriguing to the average person, but this is the stuff that's also really important. And this is why we have people like you and Kurt that are talking about these things online, because there's no standard supplement protocol when taking a PED. And it really depends on not only the category of the compounds you're taking, but their specific risk factors. Like, you don't just automatically take certain supplements. Now, a lot of people will be like, well, I bought an organ support at my local health store. I'm good to run whatever I want. This is where it is important to understand individual risk factors associated with certain compounds so you can supplement as needed. What we would use in a beginner, like a female prep scenario, to help mitigate potential issues with Anavar would be drastically different than what you would be utilizing.
Right.
And I think that's where you have to know the compounds and what they can do.
I don't think women's doses of drugs are high enough to cause organ damage, even in women.
Never seen liver enzymes even slightly elevated on Anavar.
Even the most drastic extreme woman who's running like Tren and 50 Anavar and 100 Primo a day, that's still probably not enough to cause any actual organ damage.
And even with
that's not
those
endorsement.
things,
I'm not endorsing women do that. I'm saying just that even the most crazy woman who's overdosing drugs is still not using enough drugs to actually cause organ issues from those anabolics specifically.
I think, again, when we're looking at the actual compounds and their potential side effects, we have to figure out where that data came from, and it doesn't always have practical application to our scenarios. Like, it's not going to always translate, especially in terms of bodybuilding. So we may even take precautionary measures, or at least I do, if something demonstrates the potential for neurotoxicity. There's certain supplements that we're going to address. We're going to keep estrogen in certain range, or make sure we have healthy levels. But you have to know the compound function to bring those in. And they might not be necessary. Like, I will say, like, there's probably been situations where I have brought in supplements to help mitigate potential side effects that I don't think the dosages would have produced those results. I'd rather be safe than sorry. And that's part of playing the game. And you and I are talking, we don't typically see really jacked up blood work after cycles. As long as you're pulling labs between, we don't really see horrific things after cycles.
Once you know someone's limits, you stay under those limits. Those limits really aren't going to change anytime soon. Over the 5-10 years, maybe they'll have a lower tolerance to certain compounds. But the idea that doing monthly or every 3-month blood work makes no sense, because nobody's going to just become sensitive to compounds unless you're doing what we don't do, and that's like, let's just experiment. Like, I'm healthy on these drugs, let's add in something weird like Halo and see what happens. And then you order some blood work 4 weeks later to, what did that Halo actually do? Like, then yes, if you're introducing new compounds that the athletes never used before, then yes, and you would want to just figure out what their tolerance is for each individual drug. But once you're like dealing with the basics of Test plus Masteron or Primo and GH, then you basically, once you have them dialed in to where you know exactly how much Test and Primo to get the E2 you want, and exactly how much GH and E2 you want in order to get the IGF-1 you want as the final output for the formula, you don't need to change anything. And so what the original question is, what are some standard PEDs? I would say for off season for men, it's testosterone to get to the estrogen level you want. Then you run a neutral thing like Masteron to fill in the rest of the anabolic load that you want. GH to maximize the E2 to get as much IGF-1 as possible. And then if you're insulin resistant from having too much GH present, you can use insulin to allow for better carbohydrate absorption. Although really, in most healthy people that are getting their steps in and who don't have pre-existing syndrome X, then you basically, your insulin is going to be matched to your carbs. Like, almost like if you're over 500 carbs, it pretty much ends up being 10 units Atlantis per every 100 carbs over 400. So 10 units Atlantis at 500 carbs, 20 units Atlantis at 600 carbs, 30 units Atlantis at 700 carbs. And don't do what I just said. I'm giving you an example of a hypothetical formula that you would use as a ballpark
but you always go by your fasting glucose measurements. And then in blood work, you would test what their fasting glucose and fasting insulin is. And your HbA1c will usually be a red herring. In our population, HbA1c always looks higher than it should be. And Serrano explained it to me, but I didn't really understand it. And then Serena also explained to me a different mechanism. Like, we have larger red blood cells, so that allows for more glycosylation, is I think the explanation she got from somebody that she gave to me. But she would say that's not what I said, and then she would correct me if she was here. And then with Serrano, he actually explained it as well. But I got two different explanations that both made sense at the time as to why HbA1c is false positive in bodybuilders. As far as PED standard protocol for women, I think we talked about this, that you basically run your off-season load up until about 6 weeks out, and then 6 weeks out you can switch over to Tren, Masteron, and Winstrol or Anavar. And that's pretty much it. You don't really need the GH at that point, although it'll help with fat loss in theory, and you definitely don't need insulin. That's Clen and T3 will usually be introduced at that time. Now, I'm a little bit more complicated. I'm going to titrate up the Tren over time so we find the right level for that person. And then, of course, I would want to balance T4 and T3. I wouldn't just throw T3 at the problem. But that's
Are you saying not 1,500 milligrams of Tren a week? Because I thought that was what you preach all the time, right?
Yeah, I had used 1,400 milligrams one time pre-contest, and because I didn't want to use Masteron that year. And at the time, I was under the impression Masteron caused hair loss, and so I wanted to play something safe and use just Tren to fill in the gap. And that isn't a very good substitute. The correct substitute would have been Primo. If the rumor about Masteron causing hair loss was true, really it has more to do with crushing your estrogen is what causes the hair loss more than the actual Masteron itself. And that Masteron doesn't actually crush hair loss. Something else I was doing at the same time was crushing the hair loss, but I initiated at the same time as the Masteron. So that's why I misinterpreted the Masteron as being the culprit behind the hair loss. Like, I'm on 1,500 milligrams of Masteron right now, and I've been on 1,500 milligrams of Masteron for about 6 months, and I haven't had any change in the amount of hair I had then and now. So I don't have a lot of hair, but I didn't lose any hair in the last 6 months.
Not losing anymore.
Yeah. So as far as Masteron, I don't really advocate using 1,400 milligrams of Tren.
I hope you're liking this video. I would get banned on YouTube if I showed any more of this content. So, if you want to see the rest of this video, head on over to the Rumble channel. Links below.